Hey everyone. So change of plans. Originally for this stream, we were going to cover Steven Crowder's nonsense, but it doesn't feel right after the stuff we've done tonight, so fuck it. We're going to cover another type of distorted thinking. And I want to talk about it in regards to, very specifically, one that I think comes up all of the fucking time. In therapy, in anxiety, in a trigger, all sorts of stuff. So the one I want to cover additionally tonight is the idea of what's called catastrophizing. So catastrophizing is a very interesting type of distorted thinking because what it is a type in which the person gets stuck in sort of the loop of what happens if tragedy strikes? Can it get worse? And of course, if you're someone who's anxious, of course it can get worse. But the problem with catastrophizing is that what it essentially argues is that it starts off with, I'll give you an example. I'm going to be late to school. If I'm late to school, I'm going to get marked down. If I'm marked down, I won't pass the class. If I won't pass the class, then I will fail high school. If I don't pass high school, then I'm going to end up in a situation where I'm going to have to do something abhorrent to survive. And eventually it goes down the line of either the world is going to end or you're living in the gutter. Some variation. This is what we mean by distorted thinking, specifically catastrophizing. The idea that an anxious person or a stressed person's response is to get stuck in the thought pattern of how can this get worse? If this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this happens. And it goes into this long, drawn-out process. And why I think it's important to talk about this is because I think that this type of thinking can get very, very out of whack very quickly. And I'm not trying to make this sound comical. It's not, by any stretch. I've seen clients really struggle with this and really suffer with it. It's not cool. But it can get into some really bizarre areas where it goes from everything. God, I've heard the following. I've heard like that I'll die, that someone will murder me, that like my girlfriend's gonna leave me and I'll be alone forever. I mean, like it's always these things that kind of turn into worse and worse and worse. Now we had a really good question in chat, and I do want to cover this. Tova asked, what is the difference between delusions and distorted thinking? So I think it's a pretty good idea to do this. Boop. And we're going to go into delusions. Let's see. Wikipedia defines delusion as, a delusion is a fixed belief that is not amenable to change in light of conflicting evidence. As a pathology, it is distinct from a belief based on a false or incomplete information, confabulation, dogma, illusion, or some other misleading effects of perception, as individuals with these beliefs are able to change or readjust their beliefs upon viewing the evidence for those beliefs. So, a delusion in this context is the idea that regardless of anything that is brought to your attention, regardless of what anything, you hold on to this idea like it's going out of style. And they go into a number of things like delusion of control, false belief that another person, group of people, or external force controls one's general thoughts, feelings, impulses, or behavior. You can see how that go into conspiracy. You can see the delusional jealousy, false belief that a spouse or lover has had an affair with no proof to back that claim. BPD's a bitch. Anyway. Let's see. Some other ones good here. Delusion of reference, false belief that insignificant remarks, events, or objects in one's environment have personal meaning or significance. Usually the meaning assigned to these events is negative, but the messages can also have grandiose quality. So like, if you've ever talked to like spiritualists and you've heard people talk about like the idea of like synchronicity, or they've talked about things like, you know, karma or any other nonsense like that, what we get into is this idea that imagine that was completely co-opted by your thought pattern, and there's a belief that everything that's happening is bad for a reason. The reason this differentiates from a distorted thought is that a distorted thought is one in which is amenable to change. It's not easy to change it. It's something that's very hard, but it's something that can be challenged. The other thing I would say is that we're sort of talking about the difference in scale. I would say a delusion in some ways is just a distorted thought, but to a incredibly blown up and pathological scale. And obviously if someone's experiencing distorted thinking, they're having thoughts about, you know, let's say they overgeneralize, they think in black and white terms, then that can eventually lead to levels of delusion. Now I'm going to use an example. It's going to be a funny one or a mean one, depending on your perspective. So let's look at conservatives. Conservatives, especially very far right ones, regardless of evidence put forth, will completely still hold to their notions. This is especially true with alt-right people when they are either anti-trans, they talk about the Jewish question, or any of this other bullshit. And what that brings up is that these people, regardless of evidence, you can even say this with anti-vaxxers, you can say it with flat earthers, regardless of what evidence you put forth, they will not accept it. That is delusional thinking. That is a form of delusion. Now, again, that could start with distorted thinking of, like, for example, overgeneralizing, or thinking in black and white terms. There's good and bad. There's people that believe in the flat earth. There's people that aren't. But all of those are sort of like the building blocks that lead to the delusion. Almost if you can think of those distorted thoughts as a sort of form of like brick that builds up the delusion. This is why you'll hear people sometimes use the term delusional in a negative context, saying that someone's being delusional. I would say that that's true depending on the circumstances. Now, we also want to make sure we're not being ableist. Delusions can be big parts of certain types of disorders. I would argue that some of the paranoid thinking or the dissociation that happens in BPD can get pretty close to this, where you'll get locked in a thinking pattern that your partner's going to leave you, they don't want you. That stuff can get really fucking problematic really quickly. Additionally, if you're someone who's incredibly insecure, you can get into what's called sort of a persecuted delusion, or persecutory, whatever. And I want to say with that what's really important is like, that's the idea that everyone's against me, everyone doesn't love me. And again, regardless of what we bring to that person's attention, no matter how much their parents, their friends, their boyfriend, whoever says they love them, they refuse to hear it. But again, all of that's built up by distorted thoughts, right? So it's like black and white. You're either with me or against me. So if the person critiques you, they're obviously against you, right? Like that goes into the overgeneralization idea. That can also go into the you are a burden idea, right? We talked about this earlier tonight. The you are a burden idea in and of itself, if taken to an extreme, could be a form of delusion, right? Because what it becomes is some sort of idea that like you are by definition that you somehow are beyond being lovable, and anything you ask of others is somehow hurting them or inflicting pain upon them, right? And that can be really hard to shake out when it's got to that level. The other thing I would say with distorted thinking is, so I would say distorted thinking is something that any human being can get into. This is something that just by definition can happen. But if we're talking about delusions, I would say delusions either come from extreme ends of that type of distorted thinking, or, and I would argue, or due to certain types of pathology. Most notably things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, more by bipolar 1 really, and a few other things. The reason why is that if you're in a manic episode of bipolar 1, that manic episode may make things so distorted in your mind that you may delusionally think certain things, such as, you know, everyone's happy, everything's great, even when things are not so wonderful. Or you can think everyone's against you. There's a ton of things that can happen in a manic phase. If you're talking about schizophrenia, again, delusions can often go with hallucinations. If the person's having auditory or visual hallucinations, especially the more violent type, then the problem with delusions is you might get into the locked thinking that what the voices are telling you is true. I would also say that people who go down the conspiratorial route can do this as well, though depending on whether there's pathology or there or not, you can get into some dual diagnosis funness. But yeah, I think that in a lot of ways, when we're talking about distorted thinking, coming back to this idea, catastrophizing. So how does catastrophizing look as distorted thinking? You expect disaster. You notice or hear about a problem and start the what ifs. What if tragedy strikes? What if it happens to you? What if I catch fire? What if I don't like being on fire? Like all that kind of shit. And you can say that this, taken to its extreme, could become a persecuting complex. This could become a way in which everything always goes wrong for me. I'm always a failure. Life is terrible. And it can even tease out into other types of distorted thinking. We'll cover other of these on another stream, but like there's a way in which like these can start clashing into each other. And that's where I would say delusion is. Does that make sense, Tova? Did that answer your question? We're kind of talking about orders of magnitude. Distorted thinking, I think anybody can deal with, as opposed to delusion, which I think is either triggered by certain types of diagnoses or due to kind of going to almost a pathological level too far with the distorted thinking. It does. Thank you. Okay, good. Does this make sense to everybody? Is everyone understanding what I'm saying as far as this type of distorted thinking, this idea about catastrophizing, that like when the anxiety takes over, paranoia can strike, fear can strike. You can see this sometimes in people who have OCD, especially when their OCD is around a particular thought of something happening. Obviously, we're all familiar with the, like, if I don't wash my hands, something bad will happen kind of stuff. A more realistic one that I think would be is like, if I don't do this thing a number of times, I'm going to get killed. Those things don't logically lead in any way, but they feel like they do. Yes, catastrophizing is something I do all the time. Yeah, because what it does is it feels like these things are tangentially connected, right? Like it feels like if I'm late for class, then I'll fail the class, then I'll fail high school, then I'll die. Like, and there's a way in which this can link together, and it feels intuitively true, but it's not, because just like in that scenario, if you're late to school, you could find $20. You could walk in and the teacher couldn't give a single fuck. Maybe he brought his flask to school that day and was having a chill day for him. Who knows? There's so many possibilities of what could unfold. And well, yes, sometimes we're pretty good at pattern recognition and can kind of figure out what that is. That's still a thing. By the way, if you like the stream, feel free to donate at streamlabs.com/transgirltherapist/tip. But yeah, I mean, this is a pretty big thing, because in a lot of ways, what catastrophizing ends up doing is it gives the impression, right? It gives the impression that these things logically connect because they feel like they do. But that's a feeling-based argument. Instead, it needs to be looked at as, okay, I'm hyper-focusing. I am basically, and again, some of these distorted thinking we'll go over at different streams, really get into this. But essentially what it is that you have to recognize in yourself when this comes up, how these things don't necessarily logically connect. And that can be hard in the midst of a panic attack or freaking out or whatever. I would say if you're in a relationship or relationships, I would work out with your partners ways to deal with that. One of the things me and Xena did really early in our relationship was set up cards for each other to like give us self-care. Like if I was in a panic attack or they were in a panic attack, these were really helpful, because often in a panic attack, catastrophizing happens. And so what we can do is go, okay, I'm mad at you right now. That doesn't mean I don't love you, and it doesn't mean I'm going to leave you. But you can even do this with your friends. Like you can do this with people who you care about, and maybe even your close like social groups, to sort of point this out. So, hey guys, this is what catastrophizing looks like for me. If you see me doing this, I need you to like support me, and I need you to challenge me on this, because these things don't logically lead together, but when I'm really triggered or really upset or really hurt, they feel like they do. All right. Does that make sense to everybody? Xena, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I feel like the card thing is really, really helpful. We might actually talk more on that. But yeah, our cards would have like a list, you know, a couple different things that we could go to just to kind of say that would help the other person, right? And usually this was something that I'd already worked out with my therapist or just had worked out. And it's not. And again, if you're not in a place to do that, you know, or you're not around, that's okay, and that's the thing. But like, I want to be supportive when I can, right? Like that's the thing there. So knowing what to say is really helpful.
Well, and I'll bring up one thing as well, is that as far as like relationship stuff, and this is something you and I have gotten pretty damn good at, is the learning how to put aside the hurt feelings in an argument and checking on the other person. And the way this relates to catastrophizing is often I would find in the early parts of our relationship is that once I started the catastrophizing process, I would disconnect or get very paranoid. Excuse me. And Xena would get into sort of the disconnecting thing. And so what would happen is that it would be like, well, what if this person doesn't work out? What if I can't really trust them? What if like all of these things would pair off of each other. And so what we've learned now as sort of a behavior, especially over COVID, is when we have a fight, which one of us needs to pull their head out of their ass first, usually someone will kind of like intercede. Like if we're having a fight, sometimes it's me, sometimes it's Xena, but someone will kind of go, hey, maybe we should stop this, or hey, just because I'm mad at you about this doesn't mean I don't love you. And that can be really helpful by having friends or lovers or people that you care for telling you things that, well, I know sound obvious. They don't feel obvious when you're fucking triggered. They don't feel obvious when you're panicked. Sometimes you need that validation. It's a big fucking deal. And it's okay. Something I'm going to talk about in a future stream. Maybe we'll have to do some like late night streams just for shits and giggles. But like one of the streams that I would love to fucking do is a discussion about the okayness of attention. I am so fucking sick of everyone calling people attention whores and demonizing the notion of wanting attention. I just hate it.
Right?
Like that's an example of things that like I think are just really problematic. And again, the reason why I want to cover the distorted thinking things is these are tools for you guys that when you go into therapy, you can literally look at your therapist and say, I catastrophize like a motherfucker. Holy shit. Right? Like really, like you can sit there and use the terms. One of the things that I think is really important and I want to do with this channel is I want to give you guys the language to be able to navigate this shit. And particularly because, and this is sort of something I've been thinking about for the last year and a half. You can argue how I look, right? You can say whether it works or not, whatever. I like it. But here's the thing. If we're talking about sort of trans stuff, one of the reasons why I think I've been very lucky about navigating trans stuff has been, despite my own catastrophizing about every step of transition, has been that I have a basic background and knowledge in terminology and things like that. And I'm not saying everyone needs a master's degree, but I think if you know the jargon and the language, when you walk into a doctor's office, you can kind of own it. You can kind of say, hey, here's what's going on. I think I'm this. I want help with this. This is a thing going on. And when you're very direct, please look towards the, finding a therapist video where we talk about being assertive and asking your therapist questions. Mm-hmm. That shit matters. Like full stop, that shit matters. So yeah, so I want it to be super clear that like, even in regards of like being transgender, you can get into a place where one, you may think, well, I can't transition because if I do that, then I'll lose my job and I'll do this. And again, like, I don't think that's everyone's experience. And while yes, it is still a lot of people's experience, I'm not downplaying that shit. I think going into it with a catastrophizing view, I think it sabotages the chances of it going well. I honestly think I would have been in a much worse place if I didn't have Xena sort of supporting me the whole way, going to me with appointments, helping me go into places when I dress more femme at first. Like nowadays I'm pretty okay. I can just kind of go to Meijer and like be okay, right? But like before I didn't want to go in femme because I was deeply afraid that I was going to be fucking clocked. I don't have that so much anymore, partially because I'm fairly into my transition, but also because like, again, it's not the same thing, right? It's not, I don't have to get, I don't have that. Tova, is it ableism to, let me see if I can read that. Is ableism a part of distorted thinking? Creating a label of a disability or mental illness person that they can't do this or that? I would say it depends.
I don't know if that's quite what we're talking about,
So I think you're saying is like, so the idea, so ableism isn't necessary. So we have to be really clear on what we're saying here. The definition of ableism, I understand, and I could be wrong, is that it is discrimination based on a person who is differently abled or a person who is meets the criteria of, say, like disability, right? Could distorted ableism be a part of that? I would say any ism could theoretically be a part of that. Like, let's go back to the thing. We'll talk about these in a future video, but boop.
Okay, I think I could see one. Okay.
Yeah. So, like, for example, overgeneralization. If you're making an overgeneralization about like how every person is faking being like faking having like the handicap parking space or things like that, if you just come to that conclusion, that is a distorted thinking. You're sort of creating an enemy where there is none. And we also know demonstrably that that's false. Like, most people who get on disability or get those types of handicap stickers are like legit dealing with real shit. Like, that's just fucking true. But yeah, I could say that with anything. You could even go into polarized thinking, right? There's no middle ground. We could talk about that with like race relations. We could talk about that with cis trans interactions. I've heard cis people who are absolutely horrid towards trans people. I've also heard trans people who are like, cis people are the devil. Like, okay.
I've got one I think that a lot of people deal with. Let's say you're neurotypical and you've got people around you who have ADHD. I think it's very easy to go to personalize it too much and be like, hey, they're forgetting this thing or they're not doing this thing because of some negative thing towards me, right? Maybe you think they're angry at you or they're upset or they don't want to do something or they're lazy, whatever else. But I think that could get into personalization when really for the person with ADHD, it's probably got nothing to do with the other person, right? Like, their brain fundamentally works different. I think that's a very common one that actually happens a lot.
No,
I hear that a lot about parents with ADHD kids.
Yep, so. I would agree 100%. Like, in fact, I can even go into a specific thing related to that. So one of the things I've noticed as a reoccurring thing is, depending on the parenting style, please refer to the parenting style video. When someone is coming from either authoritarian or disconnected sort of parenting, one of the things I'll often see is people saying this. Well, why can't you just do it? I get that it's a little harder, but just do it. And I know I'm sort of like making fun of these people, but that's because I think that line of thought is idiotic. Because if someone could just do the thing, whatever the thing is, right? If they're neurotypical or neurodivergent, like, the idea is that if they could just do the thing, they fucking would. Like, they don't want to hear you bitching, so like they would just do the thing if they could. But there's a reason they couldn't. I mean, if you want a good example of ADHD stuff, please check out the YouTube channel How to ADHD. She has a really good video called The Wall of Awful. Maybe I'll try to link it somewhere in there. But like, talking about this shit is super important, because like, that type of like thinking where it's like, oh, you're just not trying hard enough or whatnot, is a form of ableism. And it's also, from my perspective, a form of distorted thinking. I mean, some parents might be fucking delusional, but anyway, the point being is that I think there's a pretty good argument there to say that, like, yeah, you can get into these distorted ways of thinking and other people can use them as well. And I guarantee you, if we go through that list through the next several weeks, we're going to see numerous ways that people are getting stuck. And so what I want to do is just kind of cap this off for now. And what I'll say is this. The reason why we're covering distorted thinking is because I think it's really important for us to go in and try to create something different than I see with a lot of YouTube communities. The goal I have here is I want to create some place where people are accountable. I also want to have a place where people can actually grow. I don't see growth. What I see is political growth. I see political movement, and I'd like to be involved in that. But I also want to see people come out okay on the other side. And I want to see look for ways in which we sabotage ourselves, because we all do it, me included. Right? So I'll get off my soapbox for there. I'll say this. If you like the channel, please like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell if you want notifications. I think that's how that works. If you want to donate, please go to streamlabs.com/transgirltherapist/tip. Donations are great. If you do a donation, I'll do the one from earlier tonight. You get a cool rainbow Godzilla.
I love that.
Right? So if you want to donate, you can do as low as $1. You can do as much as you want. That money goes to help us. You can also, if you want to help us on a regular basis, you can become a patron on patreon.com/transgirltherapist. The reason why we're doing this and why we're monetizing this, because originally I wasn't going to, is that both Xena and I deal with chronic conditions. Both of us have migraines. Xena also deals with PMDD, as well as chemical sensitivities. So like they can't be around things like bleach, for example. So the problem is that you walk into any place during COVID and there's bleach and hand sanitizer.
Any of the sanitizers that have fragrance in them.
And so because they're so susceptible to migraines, they're not able to work. And so one of the reasons why I decided to monetize this was to support our household in various ways. Because while I am working a full-time job, that does sufficiently cover us. There are ways in which it doesn't, or ways in which it could be better. So that's one of the reasons why that's there. So it's not going towards just like collecting somewhere. It's something useful for helping us build the channel and helping us support ourselves. So thank you so much for that if you do it.
It gives us the extra ability to put more time into this.
Holy shit, Wooly, thank you so much.
Aw, thank you.
Wooly said thank you. That made quite a bit of sense. I look forward to more streams in the future. Aw. I gotta figure out how to make that the bottom text bigger. Streamlabs is super weird. Anyway, I'm gonna end that video here. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.